The stars burned quiet above Velara Prime, but everyone knew it was the calm before war. 52 mighty ships, each carrying the strongest champions of their kind, hovered in orbit like silver blades ready to strike. They had come not for battle, alone, but for the heart of one girl. Siraxa of the Aurelian Empire stood at the center of the grand royal observation tower, her long white gold robes glowing under the crystal light. Her face was calm, eyes thoughtful, but inside, her heart beat like thunder. She was no ordinary princess. She was the Heartbinder, a rare genetic gift passed down only once every few centuries. If she chose a mate, that person would gain influence over every alliance, every fleet, and every oath tied to her name. Her choice would change the shape of the galaxy. The Council had ruled the selection must be done fairly through combat and trials. Strength, loyalty, wisdom, all would be tested. Only the worthy would reach her side. Across the stars, empires whispered and schemed, pushing forward their best. Warriors from the Dracori clans, princes from the Silron Spiral, and psychic nobles from the Scion Circle. They wore armor of diamond glass and came in ships the size of cities. But one ship, small and rusted, arrived late. It looked like it didn't belong, and to most watching, it didn't. The humans had sent a single Corvette-class ship, barely, held together by patches and grit. Its name was the Starward Flame, and its commander was a man the galaxy had nearly forgotten, Elias Rourke. Siraxa watched as his ship took position near the edge of the formation, unnoticed by the others, almost ignored, but not by her. Her fingers reached up to the thin silver chain around her neck and touched the locket hidden beneath her robes. Inside it, there was a picture, a small image of Rourke, young, smiling, taken years ago during the Varnathi rescue. He had been a wounded commander then, dragged from burning wreckage by her own hands after he stayed behind to save civilians from a collapsing station. He was the only one who didn't kneel when she offered thanks. The only one who spoke to her like a person, not a prize, and now he was here, outnumbered, unwanted, but present. The chamber around her was full of whispers. Counselors and nobles watched the arriving fleets with calculating eyes. Every suitor came with power and promises. Some offered planets, some offered entire armadas, but none of them, not one, made her heart stir the way Elias had with just one look years ago. A look that didn't ask for anything. A look that simply said, "Are you okay?" Outside, the trials were being prepared. The first would begin within hours, a battle of ships to test leadership and strategy. It would be brutal, and some would not survive. Siraxa knew the rules well. She also knew the truth beneath them. This wasn't just about love, it was about control. The old powers wanted her tied to someone they could influence. They didn't want her to choose freely. She turned away from the window, her voice soft but firm. "Ready my private channel?" The aide beside her blinked. "Your Highness?" "To the human ship," she said. "Open a direct line. I wish to speak with him." The aide hesitated. "Protocol." She raised her hand. "I know the protocol. Do it anyway." Moments later, deep inside the Starward Flame, a quiet beep echoed in the command chamber. Commander Rourke, sitting in a worn chair patched with tape, looked up at the signal. "It's from her," said Tamsin, his engineer, eyebrows raised. Rourke didn't speak at first. He just reached forward, pressed the button, and said one word. "Hey." In her chamber, Siraxa smiled. "Still alive?" she asked. "Barely." "Good," she said. "Because you have no idea what you just walked into." He chuckled softly. "Story of my life." And for the first time in days, she felt hope stir inside her. Not because of his strength, not because of his rank, but because he had come at all. They were about to face the fury of empires, but in that moment, two souls found each other again, in the quiet between battles, and the galaxy, watching from above, had no idea what was coming. The sky above Velara Prime turned blood red as the first trial began. Across the starfield, warships of every design and color burst into motion, spinning and cutting through the void like predators on the hunt. Each commander had a single mission: prove themselves in battle. Not to destroy, but to dominate. To show control, creativity, and cunning in the face of chaos. It was a dance of death, carefully watched by the Aurelian Council, who observed every movement from the Citadel Tower, tracking tactics, predicting power, judging who deserved Syrax's hand. Most of them ignored the small ship sitting on the edge of the battle, barely armed, running systems on half power. But Syraxa didn't. Elias Rourke stood on the bridge of the starward flame, arms crossed, eyes scanning the displays. His ship was quiet, shields low, weapons cold. Tamsin leaned over the console, clearly nervous. "We're going to get crushed out there," she muttered. "Half these guys have dreadnoughts. One of them launched mini-fighters just to write his name, across space with flares." Rourke smirked but said nothing. His focus was on the battle forming around them. The combat field was like a storm of steel and fire. Ships launched waves of drones. Cloaked vessels blinked in and out, firing precision beams. A massive Sorak juggernaut rammed 2 cruisers, laughing as its hull sparked. The others fought. Like this was war. Brute force, shock tactics, ego. But Rourke knew better. This wasn't a test of weapons. It was a test of heart, of judgment. He didn't move his ship. Not yet. Instead, he waited. From the Citadel, Syraxa leaned forward as she saw what he was doing. "He's not engaging," one of the counselors said with a frown. "He's hiding." Another sneered. Typical human cowardice. But she kept watching. Her eyes sharp. She saw it. He wasn't hiding. He was reading the field. Every turn, every clash, every pattern of fire. He was learning faster than anyone. Then it happened. 2 ships locked in a duel spiraled too close to the gravitational edge of Valara's moon cluster. Their controls failed. Engines sputtered. They were going to crash. No one moved to help. It wasn't part of the trial to rescue enemies. But the starward flame lit up like a flare and cut across space in a heartbeat. Rourke angled the ship between the falling vessels, fired twin grappling beams, and pulled both clear with a jolt of thrusters that nearly tore his own hull apart. The watching nobles gasped. "What is he doing?" one shouted. "The rules. He's wasting energy." But Syraxa said nothing. Her lips just curled into the faintest smile. Rourke didn't care about points or scoring. He saved lives because they needed saving, even his rivals. The starward flame limped back into position, hull smoking, systems strained. And still, Rourke didn't fire. He started sending out pulse signals, warnings, alerts, navigational paths. He guided ships away from dangerous gravity. Wells. He broadcast enemy cloak positions not to give himself an edge but to keep others from being ambushed. Slowly, commanders began listening. Even those who had come to defeat him started adjusting their course based on his signals. Without firing a shot, he was leading them. Not through power, but through trust. Back in the Citadel, one of the judges muttered, "This wasn't the purpose of the trial. He's changing the whole scenario." Another scowled. "He's breaking the system." Syraxa rose from her seat, eyes locked on the screen. "No," she said quietly. "He's showing us a better one." By the end of the trial, over half the ships were still intact, more than any previous round in Aurelian history. And Rourke, though his ship was battered and barely flying, had stood in the center of it all like a calm star in the storm. Not the strongest, not the flashiest, but the one everyone had started following, even those who wanted to hate him. When he finally opened his comm to the Citadel, his voice came through rough but steady. "Commander Rourke, reporting completion of Trial 1, still breathing." Syraxa's voice replied, light and full of something the others hadn't heard from her in a long time. "Acknowledged, Commander. You've made an impression." And across the stars, in ships lined with gold and pride, warriors and kings and sons of empires stared at their displays in silence. For the first time they realized they weren't just fighting each other. They were all chasing the heart of a woman who might already be looking at someone else. The palace gardens of Valara Prime stretched like a living dream, full of glowing trees, soft singing vines, and floating petals that shimmered in the twilight. Every noble guest had gathered that evening, dressed in polished armor and robes that glowed with woven light. Music drifted through the air, played by instruments shaped like crystal birds. The trial of unity had ended, and now came the second challenge: diplomacy. Each suitor was given one night to walk with Siraxa through the garden, to speak heart to heart, to show not just their strength but their soul. Most came with speeches carefully written, charms practiced 1,000 times, and gifts crafted by their homeworld's finest hands. They spoke of war and victory, of how their people would grow stronger with her by their side. But when Elias Rourke's turn came, he didn't carry a single gift. He wore no armor, no glowing badge of power. Just a plain, dark coat that flapped gently in the garden breeze, and eyes that saw her, not her crown, not her legacy, but her. She met him at the gate, quiet, curious. "You walk empty-handed?" she asked, half teasing. He shrugged. "Didn't think you needed more stuff?" Her lips twitched in amusement, but she didn't laugh. She offered her arm and he took it, and they began to walk along the starlit path. Around them, noble eyes watched closely. Some with jealousy, some with confusion. "Why him?" they whispered. "He doesn't belong." But Siraxa walked with him longer than she had walked with any of the others, and they didn't speak of kingdoms or war fleets. He asked her what she loved most as a child. She told him about climbing the high ice trees of Vesper Hollow, chasing wild crystal flies with her brothers. He told her about Earth's old forests, and building rope swings with his little sister near a stream that no longer ran. When she laughed, it was real, light and clear, not the careful chuckle she gave to the others. She asked him why he saved enemy ships during the trial. He said simply, "Because no one else was going to." She paused then, quiet for a moment. "You risked your life to save people who were trying to beat you. They weren't enemies, just people trying to prove something. So was I." He kicked a pebble along the path. "I didn't come here to win a crown. I came because someone said this galaxy needs something better. Maybe I thought I could help." She watched him closely, her golden eyes searching. "You sound like a fool." He grinned. "Often am." As they sat by the glowing lake, fire flowers drifting on the surface, she reached down and touched the water. "You know, I've been promised fleets, planets, even immortality by some of these suitors." Rourke sat beside her, folding his hands. "And I've got a half-working ship, a best friend who complains constantly, and a pile of unpaid repair bills." She tilted her head, curious. "Then what are you offering me?" He looked at her then, with steady, clear eyes. "The truth. And someone who'll walk beside you, not behind you, not in front of you, just beside." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was full, thick with meaning. Neither of them spoke aloud. When they stood again, her hand brushed his just slightly, and though neither of them grabbed the other, the touch lingered. The walk back was slow. Neither of them wanted it to end. And as they reached the gates again, she said quietly, "The others fight to prove they're worthy of me. You're the only one who doesn't try." He looked at her and smiled faintly. "That's because I think you already know your worth." That night, Siraxa didn't sleep. She stood alone on her balcony, eyes on the stars. Below, the palace shimmered with music and light, but none of it reached her heart. She had been raised a weapon, trained to see love as weakness. But now, she wasn't sure. Somewhere out there, on a ship patched with hope and stubbornness, a human slept without knowing he had already changed something far more powerful than a starship fleet. He had changed her. And across the stars, word spread like fire through the noble houses. The alien princess had smiled with her eyes tonight. At him. The quiet days ended when the Dravari attacked. Without warning, their black-armored fleet descended through the Veil corridor, tearing through border defenses like they were paper. No one expected them to move so early. The trial of unity wasn't even finished, but the Dravari didn't care for ceremony or peace talks. They were pure war, cold, relentless, and full of hate for the galaxy's union. Fire lit the skies above the Velaran capital, and sirens howled across the planet. Shields snapped on, but ships rained down anyway, crashing into the oceans and mountains in waves. Inside the palace, chaos broke out. Guards scrambled, nobles shouted, and suitors rushed to their ships, each trying to prove their worth by leading the defense. Siraxa stood at the command balcony, watching her city burn, her jaw tight and eyes unreadable. Her advisors urged her to evacuate. The throne must be preserved, they said. The heir must live. But she stayed. The heart of a world does not flee, she said simply. Elias Rourke was already moving before the alarms finished. His ship, Greyfire, was a patchwork of human grit and alien salvage, but it had speed, firepower, and a crew of 4 who knew how to punch above their weight. He didn't wait for orders, didn't ask for permission. While the others prepared grand strategies, Rourke launched straight into the fight. He cut through Dravari fighters like a knife, dancing between their wings, blasting their engines with pinpoint shots. He called out over the open comms, "You want this world? You'll have to go through me." His voice was rough, tired, but full of something the others had lost, fury wrapped in hope. As the enemy fleet swarmed, he weaved through them, shielding retreating ships, locking missiles onto destroyers twice his size. He didn't care about glory. He was just trying to hold the line. From her command room, Siraxa watched the feed. Dozens of suitors fell. Their ships burned beautifully but too quickly. But the human, her human, fought with a kind of madness she'd never seen. His ship took hit after hit, hull screaming, but he didn't back down. "Pull him out," one advisor said. "He's finished." Siraxa stepped forward. "No, patch me through." The screen flickered, and Rourke's sweaty, soot-smudged face appeared. "Still alive, princess?" He grinned, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Just barely." She stared at him, heart pounding. "You're not a soldier of the Unity. Why are you still out there?" He wiped his face and gave her a crooked smile. "Because the people down there matter, and so do you." The command room fell silent. In that moment, Siraxa made her decision. "I'm going up," she said. The room erupted. Advisors panicked, guards protested, but she overruled them all. Within minutes, she was aboard her personal cruiser, the Ebon Light, directing the last of the defensive fleet toward the fight. Her ship wasn't just fast, it was legendary, lined with plasma spears and fitted with experimental drives. When it jumped into orbit beside Greyfire, Rourke blinked. "You followed me into hell?" She replied calmly. "Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Together they turned the tide, with Siraxa coordinating fleet movements and Rourke taking out enemy leaders in fast, brutal strikes. The Velaran forces pushed back. It wasn't clean. Dozens of ships were lost, cities burned, but the Dravari weren't ready for a human with nothing to lose and a princess who had finally stopped listening to tradition. They fought like stars colliding, and slowly, painfully, the enemy began to retreat. When the last Dravari ship was pushed beyond the Veil corridor, the skies over Valara Prime glowed with the fading trails of battle. Ships limped back to the surface. Fires smoldered across the horizon, but the world still stood. And from the observation deck of Ebon Light, Siraxa looked out at the wreckage, and at the tiny, battered silhouette of Greyfire, still floating, beside her ship. "He's not like the others," she whispered to herself. "He fights because he cares." And in her chest, where duty had always drowned emotion, something warm flickered to life. Not weakness, not hesitation, but something far stronger, something she could no longer ignore. The world had barely begun to breathe again when the real storm arrived. Not with guns or ships, but with politics, pride, and promises. The palace walls, though untouched by fire, rang with heated voices. Council members argued, suitors returned. From the wreckage furious and foreign delegates whispered of betrayal. Siraxa had not only broken tradition by flying into battle herself, She had flown beside him. A human. An outsider. Someone who hadn't even entered the trial of unity through the proper channels. Now every noble house wanted answers. Some demanded Rourke's arrest, calling him a manipulator, a trickster who'd used chaos to steal favor. Others saw an opportunity and began to craft stories claiming they had coordinated with him all along. But Siraxa knew the truth. Elias had flown into that fire not to impress, not for power, but because it was right. She remembered the way he'd looked at the people, not just her, like they mattered, like saving lives was reason enough to risk everything. Rourke, for his part, didn't ask for thanks. He didn't attend the ceremonies, didn't care for the politics. His ship was damaged beyond easy repair, and he spent most of his days down in the lower hangars, helping fix others instead. The Royal Engineers at first had laughed at the humans' rough methods, until they saw how fast he worked, how cleverly he rewired systems using spare parts no one else would have touched. One night, Siraxa walked into the hangar alone. He was under a Corvette, grease smeared on his arms, sparks flying from his tool. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Figured you'd be too busy playing queen," he joked. She didn't smile. "I'm tired of playing what they want," she said softly. "I want to be me, with someone who sees the real world." He stood, brushing his hands off. "You already know how I see you." Silence stretched between them. Then she stepped closer. "The others all want my name, my power, my throne. You didn't ask for any of it. You just stood beside me." He looked at her, not as a ruler, not as a prize, but as someone worth believing in. "Because I choose you, Siraxa, not the crown." Her breath caught. No one had ever said it like that. Not her generals, not her advisors, not even the suitors who claimed to love her. And in that quiet, grease-scented hangar, something shifted. But peace never lasted long. The trial of unity's final stage loomed. The ancient laws demanded that Siraxa make her formal choice of consort before the whole council and the watching worlds. Every house expected one of their own to be chosen. The war had changed nothing, they claimed. Rules were rules. Rourke wasn't even supposed to be eligible. "Then change the rules," Siraxa told them. But they pushed back. Threats followed. Alliances promised for years would be broken. Trade routes would shut. Treaties would fall apart. Valara could stand alone, they warned, but not without cost. Siraxa didn't flinch. She called for a gathering in the Star Chamber, a place where only truth could be spoken, bound by the light of the galaxy's judgment. Rourke stood beside, her uncomfortable informal wear, eyes wary but steady. The nobles laughed. The Dravari attack had faded from their minds already. They only saw power and bloodlines. But then Siraxa spoke. Her voice was calm, clear. "You all fought for my hand. You offered ships, riches, and titles. But only one stood with me when the skies burned. Not because he had to, not for favor, but because he cared. That is what our people need, not just strategy, not just lineage, but heart." A silence followed, heavy and long. One noble spat the word human like poison. Another stormed out. But many others paused and thought and remembered the names of their sons and daughters who were saved by Greyfire that day. The chamber did not vote. Siraxa did not ask permission. She declared, "I choose Elias Rourke." Some protested, others bowed. The laws bent that day, under the weight of truth, not tradition. And as the Star Chamber's light shone down, catching the dust and fire glow, in the air the human and the princess stood together, not as ruler and subject, not as prize and winner, but as equals. And somewhere deep in the galaxy something old stirred, as if recognizing the birth of something stronger than bloodlines or politics. A bond forged in battle, in belief, and in the stubborn, brilliant fire of the human soul. The days that followed Siraxa's declaration were filled with uneasy silence and quiet movement. Not everyone was happy. Whispers drifted through the golden halls of Valara like smoke, soft but choking. Some noble houses refused to speak to. the throne. Others pulled ships from joint patrols and shut down trade with subtle spite. Siraxa stood firm, her eyes sharper now, her voice colder when needed. She knew the cost of her choice. She bore it without regret. Rourke stayed beside her, not as a prince or politician, but as a steady hand when hers shook behind closed doors. He spoke little in council, listened more. But when he did speak, his words hit like hammer blows, direct, true, and without the fluff of nobility. Some began to listen, a few began to follow. Then came the next blow, not from within, but from the void. Scouts returned shredded, an entire listening post vanished. No distress call, just silence where systems once hummed. Rourke's fingers tensed as he scanned the reports. The energy readings didn't match Dravari. They were worse, older, colder. Siraxa watched the data flicker across the wall with a frown carved from ice. Then came a message, broadcast not in words but images. A shape from the dark, long, silent, covered in strange runes. It moved like shadow and fire, a forgotten empire, resurfacing. The Shirith, a species no one had spoken of in centuries. The galaxy had thought them extinct. They weren't. They had just been waiting, watching. And now they were coming. No demands, no threats. Just an encoded message. We are the end. Prepare. Panic. Rippled. Old alliances broke further. Everyone wanted to defend their own borders. Siraxa called an emergency summit. Few attended. Even fewer offered ships. They argued, they blamed, they made excuses. But when she stood and told them, then die alone, the chamber fell still. Rourke rose beside her and spoke what none of them dared. They're not coming for Valara. They're not coming for any one planet. They're coming for everything. Run, hide, fight. But understand this. If we don't stand together now, there won't be anyone left to fight later. One by one, systems lit up. Not many. Just enough. Old enemies. Bitter rivals. A handful of daring fools. And humanity. Earth sent a fleet. Smaller than others. Older ships. But filled with volunteers who knew what was at stake. Rourke took command of a united squadron. A strange mix of alien craft and human-made ingenuity. They trained in silence. They waited, hanging, in the deep cold near the edge of known space. Then the sky split. The Jirith came like a wound tearing open. Their ships didn't roar. They hummed, dark, sharp like blades drifting through black water. Their weapons weren't lasers or torpedoes, but pulses of gravity and light that bent reality. The first strike erased 3 scout ships in seconds. Siraxa gave the order. The united fleet surged forward like a wall of fury. Battles broke out in flashes, torpedoes lighting up the void, plasma beams searing across darkness. Valaran stormships clashed with Jirith vessels while human ships danced and dove, their smaller frames slipping through impossible gaps. Rourke flew at the front, his ship rebuilt and renamed Greyfire II. Every movement was instinct. Every shot counted, but even with all their power, they were losing. The Jirith weren't just warriors, they were ancient, coordinated, driven by a hive mind that predicted attacks before they landed. The fleet fractured. Screams echoed through comms. One of Siraxa's escort ships exploded beside her. Rourke's voice cut in. They're reading our formations. We're too predictable. We need chaos. Real chaos. Siraxa gave him a glance that said everything. Do what you must. Rourke broke rank. He dove into enemy lines, drawing fire. Then, he vanished, shutting down power, going cold, riding his momentum through Jirith ranks like a ghost. They chased. They split their focus, just as planned. The humans had built Greyfire II with more than weapons. Hidden inside was an ancient human trick, an EMP surge, refined and targeted. As the Jirith ships closed in, Rourke armed it. For Earth, he whispered. For her. Then he detonated it. The pulse rolled like thunder through space. Jirith ships shuddered, froze, lost coordination. The Velaran fleet struck with everything they had. The tide turned. Not completely, not easily, but it turned. And in that moment, hope returned with it. Smoke drifted through the command deck of the Greyfire II, though there was no fire. The lights flickered. Systems blinked. And in the captain's chair, Rourke sat slumped, blood on his brow, chest barely rising. The detonation had worked. The Girith had scattered, their formation broken. Several ships left frozen in space like dead statues. But the price had been high. The Greyfire II had taken the full shock of the feedback wave, and most systems were fried. He had saved them. But the silence around him was loud. Saraxa's voice crackled through the damaged comms, panicked, sharp, not royal. Rourke, Rourke, answer me. But there was no reply. Her ship spun through the wreckage, engines burning as she closed the gap. The sight of the Greyfire II, dark, drifting, froze something inside her chest. Without waiting for clearance, she launched toward it in a personal pod, leaving her guards shouting after her. She didn't care. She had already made her choice, and she would not let the galaxy take him away. The pod slammed against the airlock and sealed. She forced her way inside, past fallen beams and torn panels, her royal robes streaked with grime. Her heart pounded louder than the alarms. Then she saw him, slumped but breathing. Barely. She rushed to him, her voice trembling as she called, his name again and again. He opened his eyes slowly. "Hey," he whispered, like it was a joke between them. "Told you I'd cause chaos." Her hands shook as she pressed them to his chest, not caring who she was or what titles she wore. "You idiot," she said, voice cracking. "You nearly died." He smiled weakly. "Worth it." Then he passed out. Back outside, the fleet had rallied. With the Girith coordination broken, the Allied forces drove them back, blasting the crippled ships to pieces. Some Girith fled into the deep dark. Others detonated their own ships to avoid capture. In the silence after battle, wreckage floated everywhere. Twisted metal, drifting bodies, and scorched hulls. It was a grim victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Velaran flagship sent out a message of survival. Other systems responded, some with tears, some with cheers. For once the galaxy had united, not because of fear, but because a single stubborn human had reminded them what courage looked like. Rourke spent days recovering inside the Royal Med Bay. Saraxa refused to leave his side. She canceled meetings, ignored protests from advisors, and even snapped at a high-ranking general who questioned her priorities. "He is my priority," she said, voice cold and clear. The palace shifted after that. Whispers grew quieter. The nobles who had mocked her before now said little. Some even offered gifts, trying to win favor again. She didn't care. Her focus was only on the man who had saved not just her world, but perhaps all worlds. When he finally sat up, blinking against the soft lights, Saraxa was there, holding a small tray of warm food. "Don't tell me you cooked," he muttered. She gave him a look. "I ordered it," she said. "I'm still royalty." He chuckled, wincing slightly from the pain, but then his expression softened. "So what now?" he asked. She sat beside him, folding her hands. "Now," she said quietly, "the galaxy has seen what a human can do. What you can do. They'll listen now." He shook his head. "They should listen to you." She leaned closer. "They will, because I'll be the empress they need, and you'll be the voice they never saw coming." He stared at her for a long moment. "You sure?" he asked softly. "I'm just a guy from Earth, grew up in a junkyard, fixed ships, got in fights." She smiled gently. "And yet every empire in the stars would give anything to have your courage." She reached out, touching his hand. "I had suitors from 10 planets. Princes, warlords, diplomats, warriors. All of them polished, perfect, and proud." She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "But I chose you, Rourke." not because of what you wear or where you're from, but because of who you are when the world is burning. He looked at her, unsure what to say. She kissed him. Outside the palace, fireworks lit up the night sky of Valara. Ships returned home. Wounded were tended to. The dead were honored. And, for the first time in centuries, peace felt possible. It was built on ashes, yes, but also on choice, on courage, and on the quiet truth that even across the stars, one human heart can change everything. The royal gardens of Valara shimmered beneath twin moons, their silver light falling gently across the grass and marble paths. A soft breeze whispered through the tall violet trees as guests from across the galaxy gathered beneath floating lanterns. No one carried weapons. No one raised their voice. There were no empires tonight, no borders or crowns, only peace. At the heart of the celebration, Siraxa stood in a flowing black and gold gown, her crown resting lightly on her brow, though her eyes searched for only one person. Then she saw him. Rourke stepped onto the platform, still in a simple dark jacket, with a medal he hadn't asked for pinned to his chest. He walked slowly, his injury still healing, but every step drew the eyes of 1,000 dignitaries. A low murmur passed through the crowd. Some didn't understand, some still whispered, "Why him?" But most had seen enough. They had watched his ship fly into fire. They had heard his voice during the final broadcast calling for unity with smoke in his lungs and blood in his mouth. And now they saw what Siraxa had always known. He wasn't just a man. He was a reminder. That courage did not wear armor. That power did not need a crown. He joined her at the top of the steps where a single glowing orb hovered above a stone table. It was an old ritual, passed down from the first star kings of Valara, a joining of spirits, a vow between equals. Siraxa looked at him, and for a moment her mask slipped. The Empress was gone. In her place stood the girl who had once trained with blades in secret, who had dreamed of flying free, who had met a human in a storm and found herself changed forever. "Ready?" she asked softly. Rourke looked out over the sea of alien faces, all waiting for him to stumble, to fail, to break under the weight of so many stares. But he didn't. He reached forward and placed his hand over the orb. "Only if you are." Light bloomed between their hands, soft and warm, wrapping around them like mist. The orb rose higher, then burst into a gentle wave of golden energy that rippled out into the sky. The crowd gasped. The ritual was complete. She had chosen him, not as a trophy, not as a symbol, but as her equal. Later that night they walked alone along a quiet path, far from the palace lights. Siraxa slipped off her shoes and let her toes sink into the cool grass. Rourke followed her, his hand brushing against hers. "You could have had anyone," he said, voice low. "You still can." She looked at him with a tired smile. "I don't want anyone else. I want the one who held my hand when the world was ending, the one who asked me what I wanted, not what I could give." He nodded slowly, thinking. "You know this won't be easy," he said. "They'll fight us. Some won't accept it." She turned toward him fully. "Then let them try," she said. "We've already faced worse." In the weeks that followed, the new Peace Council met for the first time, not in a fortress or a war chamber, but in the rebuilt commons of the old Velaran library. Rourke sat beside Siraxa, not with authority, but with voice. His words were simple, direct, and honest. And in a room full of politicians and generals, it was his honesty that changed the most minds. Treaties were signed. Trade opened. Even the once hostile Xerath, broken and humbled, sent envoys seeking to rebuild. The galaxy was not healed, but it was healing. And at its center stood a man who had never wanted power, and a woman who had once believed she could never choose love over duty. Years passed. Monuments were built, some bearing his name, some not. But he never cared for statues. He cared for the garden, the one he and Siraxa tended behind the palace, far from the eyes of diplomats and soldiers. It was quiet there, peaceful, Flowers from Earth bloomed beside Velarin vines, and sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, he would sit, with her beneath the twin moons, their hands entwined, no words needed. The galaxy had vied for her heart, noble houses, warlords, rulers of stars. But she had chosen him, and in choosing him, she reminded everyone of something they had forgotten, that love, real love, was not a weakness. It was the strongest force in the universe. And sometimes the heart of a single human could light the path for all of them.